Welcome to today's keynote session of the 2022 Ingenium Professional Development Seminars with the delivered lunch sponsored by Stantec. I hope you enjoyed your quinoa salad as much as I did and the cookie. On behalf of Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba, I am Andrew Kalashinsky, a member of the Ingenium Task Group, and I will be the moderator for today's keynote. Throughout today's presentation, we encourage you to send in any questions you may have for the presenter via the chat function. Please note that this presentation is being recorded and will be available through the Ingenium Hub from tomorrow until January 2023. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our presenter for this keynote session on the topic of the future of work, Jane Helbrecht, who is joining us from Uplift Engagement. Jane will be leading an interactive session today, so I hope you've had your lunch and are ready to engage. Please be ready to turn on at least your microphone and your webcam if you're comfortable with that. In the breakout rooms, contribute your thoughts and comments through the chat box and take part in the polls. Hello, Jane. You can now share your screen and it's over to you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. So I'm going to get my screen going here. Hopefully you can all see that. Feel free to throw me a message in the chat with a thumbs up or a yes, just so I know that that's showing up there and we're good to go.
Yes, you're good.
Okay, excellent. So welcome everybody. It's nice to be back again this year. I think last year we talked a little bit about engagement in the workplace and we talked about playing to strengths. And this year we're focusing on the future of work. Please feel free to throw things in the chat and to comment, ask questions along the way. There will be time for a Q&A session at the end, but if some timely questions pop up along the way, I'm happy to answer those. We're going to jump right in here. I know Andrew mentioned there is going to be a little bit of a breakout session at one point. I don't want that to scare you away. I know sometimes in a conference, people are like, oh no, a breakout session. I don't want to. I promise it's going to be very low key, easy question to explore with a group. You can keep your cameras off if you need to. You can throw them on if you want to. But most importantly, just looking for folks to unmute and share a little bit in one short breakout session. So we're going to jump into this idea of the future of work. And some of the things that we're going to be talking about here today are the Great Resignation. I'm sure all of you have been hearing a lot about the Great Resignation. What are some of the trends that we're seeing right now in terms of what employees are looking for from workplaces and some of the shifts that workplaces may need to make along the way? And then we're going to talk a little bit about reimagining work. So how are we reimagining the workplace, how we get work done, where we get work done, and what is that going to look like? And what does that mean for organizations? What does it mean for HR folks, for leaders, and for all of you as individuals along the way? So let's start with this idea of the Great Resignation. Every industry is a little bit different when it comes to the impact. Some industries have been hit really hard. I think if we look at hospitality, restaurants, hotels, that kind of industries particularly been hard hit. But we're certainly seeing it a lot in tech. We're seeing turnover rates that hit close to 30–40% in a lot of tech organizations right now. So I'm going to start with a quick poll question just to get us all participating here and thinking a little bit. I'm just curious whether you're a leader and you actually have the stats, or you're just sort of thinking anecdotally for your organization as an individual. Are you noticing more turnover in your organization as compared to pre-pandemic? And so Gemma's going to throw up a poll here for you to vote on. And I would just like to know, yes, are you experiencing more turnover? No, about the same. Would you say less turnover? Or also, if it's not applicable to you, feel free to throw that in there. So I'll just give it a moment to see what the responses are. We've got about half of folks have already responded, so we'll give it another 15 seconds or something here. Okay. All right. So we're seeing about a little over 30% of folks saying that yes, there's more turnover, and about half, a little bit more than half, saying it's about the same as pre-pandemic. A couple people even saying, well, actually one person saying no, less turnover. So good on whatever company or organization that person is with. So feel free to share the poll results there, Gemma, if you like, but we are seeing a little over 30% of you, 34% of you saying that yes, we are still experiencing some further turnover. So that's just good to know as we sort of go into this conversation. And we're not going to be just talking about turnover. We're going to be talking about lots of different things, but it is a place we can sort of start here. Now, when I talk about the Great Resignation, you might be thinking about it in terms of a few different terms people are throwing around. Some people are calling it the Great Reshuffle, the Great Rethink, the Great Reevaluation, the Great Reckoning. I've even heard the Great Regret. There's been a phenomenon in some industries of what they're calling a boomerang effect, where folks have left organizations only to maybe come back a few months later, realizing maybe that the grass isn't always greener. But what I would say is we are generally seeing a higher level of turnover post-pandemic, and it's possible that that may sort of be the new normal going forward. We might find that turnover reduces a little bit, but it may not fully reduce back to exactly what it was pre-pandemic. So a survey that was recently conducted by the Bank of Canada said that almost 20% of workers expect that they will look for a new job in the next 12 months. Particularly when we look at Gen Z and millennial folks, over half of those in Gen Z and millennial demographics said that they would be thinking about making a move in the next year. And we're also hearing that 35% of folks who quit in the past 2 years took a new job in the same industry. So only 35% actually stayed in their industry. A number of people that made changes moved to new and different industries. And really, when we look at the Great Resignation, this is really just signaling a shift in what employees value and what employees' expectations are from work going forward. And during the pandemic, there were sort of two reasons that we experienced this really big increase. One is there were some people that maybe held off from leaving a job during the pandemic early on, right? So you had folks maybe not leaving in 2020 because they weren't sure what the market was like, didn't want to take a risk. And so in 2021, we've seen people now all making those shifts that they held off on in 2020. But we are also seeing some people who are just completely reevaluating what they want out of their career and life, that work-life balance piece of things. And so we'll touch on that a little bit as we continue to move forward here. Now, why does all this matter? Well, challenges with talent, challenges with having the right talent, finding the right talent, really can have a negative impact, can really torpedo business strategy and an organization's ability to get things done and to follow through on their promises, to be able to deliver on the projects and services that they provide. But we can also recognize that big changes mean big opportunities, right? When we have big changes like this in the workforce and in the way that we work, there really is this opportunity to reimagine, to think about what the future of work might look like. So the good thing is too that, overall hiring rates do outpace resignation rates. There's more opportunities out there. There's, even though the market is slowing a little bit right now, as we sort of head into this last quarter of 2022, we're still seeing there's a lot of opportunity. And so the good thing is the majority of talent also isn't totally dropping out of the workforce. So people aren't just totally leaving, they're just checking out new and different opportunities. So a couple things around turnover before I get into some tech trends that I just think are worth looking at when you're thinking about the future of work for your team, for your organization, for yourself as an individual. When people leave to go to a new organization, the top 3 reasons that they accept a new offer are typically career opportunities, so more growth opportunities, the nature of the job. They feel that the job will be a better fit for them, maybe for their skills, their strengths, or the direction that they want to go, and development opportunities. So career opportunities sort of being maybe promotion, title, some of those types of things, development opportunities being opportunities to learn. Now, the reasons people leave an organization on average, this is according to McKinsey, is opportunities for career advancement. So again, lack of opportunity for a promotion or for that next role. Base pay is listed as a reason why people often leave, and then satisfaction with my role and responsibilities. So these are some of the things that are prompting this movement in the market right now. Now, when we think about trends, when we think about what employees want, I want to hear from you first. So we're going to do a quick breakout. Again, please stick with me. I see there's 50 of us in this session I'm hoping you all stick with me through this short breakout. So what I'd like to do is we're going to put you in groups, decent sized groups, so that if 1 or 2 people decide not to participate, it's not the end of the world. But we're going to send you off and just ask you to share with your group how the pandemic has changed your feelings about work and life, or your work life. And maybe for some of you, it won't have changed anything. For others, maybe it's prompted major changes, major rethinking in terms of how you want to work. Share what you're comfortable with, but I'm going to send you off. We're going to give you probably about 8 minutes to chat with your group about this. And when we come back, I'm going to ask folks to throw some of what was discussed in the chat so that we can just discuss it as a larger group. But this will, I think, lead really nicely into what some of the trends are that are coming as we head into 2023. So how has the pandemic changed your life? Gemma, I'm going to ask you to send folks off to that breakout room. We'll give you about 8 minutes, and then we will pull you back into the main room here and engage in some discussion in the chat. Okay, so we'll send you off now. Okay, I see some of you are back. We're just waiting for a few more folks to come back from the breakout room. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. All right, so what I'd like to do now is I'd love if anything came up in your group that you're willing to share and throw into the chat. Were there some themes, some things that you talked about where you said, this is what's changed, this is how my take on work and maybe the place work plays in my life, or what that work-life sort of integration looks like for me now? I'd love to hear a few examples. So if folks can throw some quick thoughts into the chat, that would be great. And I think that's going to inform our discussion on the future of work really nicely. And maybe if nothing has changed for you, feel free to acknowledge that too. You can say, actually, I don't really think anything has changed in terms of my take on work and life. So I'm looking for a few comments to start coming in here. What do we think? Common theme was changes to meetings. Interesting. Yes. Maybe too many meetings pre-pandemic, maybe too many during the pandemic when it was easy to book everything on Zoom. So are we changing the number of meetings that we have? Are we changing the way we facilitate those meetings or how we use those meetings? Having sick kids is way more inconvenient now. Can't send them with a sniffle anymore. Yeah, so that has an impact. Looking for better work-life balance. Okay. Any other comments? How important face-to-face interaction is, while also acknowledging that working from home is convenient. How do you balance maybe both of those things? Pandemic differentiated good employers from not so good employers. Yeah, so it made the people that maybe the organizations that had some good foundations and trust already laid probably weathered some of these changes a bit better than others. Things listed that have changed our collaboration, view of employers, work-life balance to work from home, and more virtual meetings. Okay, excellent. So this is sort of helpful context to sort of hear what's going on in your world, that we can be flexible, that we can get work done from anywhere. Remote work has not gone away. Yeah, and you know what? Spoiler alert on trends, it's not going away. Remote work is here to stay. Every industry is different in terms of what they can or can't accommodate, but remote work is definitely here to stay. Okay, so thank you for sharing those comments. Continue to keep throwing them in the chat if you have more to add, and we'll continue on here with some of the content that I want to share. So I've got some information here from Gartner. They've done a ton of research. They do a ton of research on work and workplaces generally, but they did some surveys around how things have changed for employees through the pandemic, and again, how that has impacted how they feel about work and life. And so you'll see here that the yellow are sort of the strongly agree folks. And there's a lot of agreement that the pandemic has shifted my attitude toward the value of aspects outside of work, that it's maybe made me rethink the place that work should have in my life. It's made me long for a bigger change in my life. It's changed my perspective on the desirability of my location, of maybe where I work. It's made me want to contribute more to society. It's made me question the purpose of my day-to-day job. And it's changed my expectations towards my employer. So you see, when it comes to all of these questions, more than 50% or more agreed or strongly agreed with these statements. And I think that statements like, it's made me long for a bigger change in my life, it's made me want to contribute more to society, it's made me question the purpose of my day-to-day job, says a lot, right? It says people are really thinking deeply over the last couple of years about what they want to be doing, where they want to be doing it, and what that balance looks like from them. And many people are still working their way through that change and what that's going to mean for them. And it means there will be continued movement in the job market, but also I think continued opportunities for folks to be having conversations with their leaders, with their organizations about what they're looking for, and organizations determining what they can and can't accommodate and what they want to do to address some of these changing expectations of folks. Now, what's most important to people? Well, we are hearing a lot about well-being. Well-being is sort of going to be one of the new metrics that I think we're going to measure at work, and there's a much greater focus on it. And you can see here, according to this LinkedIn Global Talent Trends study, that the percentage of job postings that mention some keywords like flexibility and well-being are way up in 2022. So 83% more job postings mention flexibility. I think it's, I can't see my full screen here, but I think it's like 147%, yeah, 147% increase in the use of the term well-being. And almost half of folks say that they're putting time spent with family and friends over their work lives. And that is an increase from pre-pandemic. 63% of job seekers called work-life balance a top priority when they think about picking their next role. So this is one trend that we're seeing, right? This increased focus on well-being, and we'll talk in a little bit about what that looks like and what that actually means in practice. What we also know is that employees are telling us what they want in the future, and what they want is human workplaces, they want hybrid options, and they want the workplace to be equitable. They want smart organizations that will listen to them, right? So we want human-centric workplaces, we want hybrid options, and we want these options to be equitable. Now, you've probably heard this term a little bit over the past 6 months. It's become a hot topic, a hot term, this idea of quiet quitting, right? Why do people quiet quit? So I want to address that this has actually always been a thing. It's not new, it's just a new word for it. I think quiet quitting is basically presenteeism, right? And presenteeism is that idea of somebody who's at work, who goes through the motions, does everything there, checks every box, but maybe isn't going above and beyond. I think it's important to note when we look at engagement in the workplace, it hasn't actually changed very much in the last number of years. So that this information at the bottom here is from Gallup. And looking at the past 20 years, you see that the percentage of engaged employees versus actively disengaged employees is very similar, right? We've ranged between 26 and 36% over the last 20 years of engagement, and between, what's the low end here, 13 and 17% for disengagement. And ironically, higher disengagement in 2018, 2 years before the pandemic even hit. So we haven't actually seen a major change in disengagement or in people not sort of pulling their weight at work. I think what we are seeing is people sort of drawing boundaries about how many hours they're willing to work. Or whether what they're being asked to do is actually at a higher level, and we need to look at whether there's an adjustment to compensation or an opportunity for a title change or a promotion. What we want to address here too is that we are responsible for creating engagement in the workplace. Workplaces are responsible for creating engagement, and I think we'd find most people when they start a new job are pretty engaged, right? Like on day one of a new job, most of us are pretty engaged. I know if I leave and go somewhere new on day one, I'm like, okay, I'm here to make a good impression. I'm here to have an impact. Like, I don't show up to day one of a new job and go like, ooh, let's see how little I can do. I'm there to make a good impression, to contribute and make a difference. And so most people start a new job being highly engaged. And the question then is, okay, what is it that's happening in a workplace? What is it that's happening in a team that causes that high level of engagement to start to go downhill? Because most of us start day one pretty engaged, right? And so we need to work on building engagement. Now, when we think about reimagining work, there's a few things we can be thinking of, but I'm curious if there's anything that comes to mind for you. So I'll just throw this out as a question. You can throw some answers in the chat. But what comes to mind to you when you think about how the workplace is going to change in the next number of years? Are there certain things that are already happening in your workplace that are changing? Are there certain changes that you think are going to be coming down the pipeline? And maybe some of these have already been mentioned. You know, somebody said remote work has not gone away yet. It's probably here to stay as a part of that reimagined workplace. But what else? When you think about reimagining work, what else do you think is going to change in the next couple of years? What do you think is going to change in 2023? But what do you think is even going to change in 2028, 5 years from now? Any thoughts on that? And as you're sort of thinking that through, maybe entering some things into the chat here, I'm going to go to the next slide. The next slide is actually a video that I want to show. It's about a 2-minute video. It's gonna be about this idea of reimagining work. And it's kind of a funny one. It's one I found just a month or so ago, and it's through a company called Upwork. Upwork does, maybe you've heard of it, Upwork does contractor agreements. So they have a whole slew of contractor folks that do things like marketing activities where, I'm a small consulting company. Maybe I would hire somebody through Upwork to do work on my website or to build some marketing collateral for me instead of working with a large agency. They would have developers and software engineers on their contract roster. They might have folks that act as virtual assistants and things like that. So they're really thinking about the future of work. And this video really made me laugh. I will just warn you, there's one point in the video where it seems like somebody's going to swear, but I listened to it like 5 times and confirmed the person did not actually swear. So I just want, if you think you hear something, I listened to it a lot and it didn't happen. So I'm just warning you on that. I was making sure. I was like, can I show this? Can I not show this? I do see a few chats coming in, or a few messages coming in here. So flex time, not working a solid 8-hour time block. Maybe a 4-day work week model. Yeah, we're seeing that in a lot of organizations. Maybe flexibility and more virtual work compared to the last 3 years. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so those are some of the things you're thinking about. Now let's see, we'll get my video going here. Andrew's gonna let me know if there's any issues with the video in terms of sound or sort of quality. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but I'll throw this out there for a watch.
Come on, guys. We need to start hiring freelancers as part of our plan.
No, we need full-timers. Butts in seats. That's what Jack would have said.
Stop worrying about what I would have said. I'm dead. Let me tell you a little secret, Francine. It's all made up. These old ideas, working in an office, 9 to 5, Alan's job. We made it up, didn't we, Alan? So, if it's all made up, what's stopping you from making up something better? And why would you talk when you can sing? Bunch of dead guys made up work way back when.
It's our turn now, we'll make it up again. I'll hire remote talent like Yorgos in Greece.
I am a freelance beast.
Nice to meet you, Yorgos. I'm deceased.
We'll build freelance teams with more agility.
The old way of working is deader than me.
Yes, this is how we work now.
Yeah.
We'll scale up and we'll scale down
Before you're 6 feet underground.
This is
Let the old ways of working kick the bucket. Take the leap and just say,
Okay, so I wanted to share that video. I swear I don't get a commission from Upwork. They're not paying me to show their video everywhere. But part of what I love about it is just this acknowledgement that like we made it all up. Like when we think about work and how we get work done, we made it up. You know what? We came up with an idea of hours of what we expect in terms of in office, out of office, how we collaborate, how we have meetings, all of these other things. And we made it up and we can change it, right? There's nothing stopping us from changing it. So one of the things I'm going to be sort of encouraging workplaces and people to think about is how do we think about work as a bit of an experiment, right? Like, how are we experimenting with the workplace and how we can do things differently? One of the things that we are seeing is that the workplace, the physical workplace for many organizations is now really just a meeting place. It's not a place people work from day in, day out. Some organizations still have people back in the office, but many that don't decided, hey, we'll keep maybe a smaller space. And it's a place that we have meetings. It's a place that we have time for collaboration, connection, for celebration. But it's not where we actually get our productive, deep focus work done. Most of us are doing that somewhere else, right? And maybe playing to people's preferences. The people that want to be in office can be in office, and the people that don't aren't. So some of the things that we're going to talk about in this presentation when it comes to reimagining work are these things. So hybrid work, remote, well-being and flexibility. What does that look like? Job design and workflow, a little bit on leadership and culture, and asynchronous work as well. And all of these things really come into reimagining the employee journey or the employee experience. Maybe that's a term that you've been hearing a bit more about over the past few years. We used to talk about employee satisfaction, employee engagement. I'd say now a term that's really big is employee experience. And employee experience is really understanding where people are at and what that experience is at every part of their journey as an employee, and assessing and evaluating, like, how was that attraction, selection, recruitment process? How was that onboarding process? Are we engaging you day in, day out in the work that we're doing, still with engagement surveys, in terms of development, performance, and then exit? How is their experience still exiting? Are we being intentional about how people leave our organization? And ideally, when people are leaving our organization, are we still creating alumni? Like, are people leaving in a way where they still feel great about the organization? They feel proud to have been a part of it, and they would consider themselves sort of alumni. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I see it on LinkedIn from time to time. I see folks who have like X, company name in their LinkedIn profile, X Deloitte, X Skip the Dishes, X Google, X Microsoft. Those are alumni. Those are people that are so proud of having been a part of that company that in their LinkedIn headlines, along with their current role, they're also including, I'm an ex Skip the Dishes person, right? I'm an ex Bold Commerce team member. And so we want to create this experience where people have such a good experience that they're alumni, that they're still cheerleaders and supporters of the organization. Now, hybrid and remote, that came up in the chat earlier. It's here to stay. Some form of remote work, of hybrid work, is absolutely here to stay. And the research would also show that, like, we're really just at the beginning of hybrid and remote workplaces, even though obviously some workplaces have been doing this for years before the pandemic, right? Places like IBM have had people remote globally for many, many years. But this sort of mass movement towards remote and hybrid work, I mean, we're 2.5 years in. We haven't even scratched the surface of what remote and hybrid work is going to look like in 5 years or 10 years, right? Just now we're doing all of the research on what's worked and what hasn't worked in the last couple of years and what that means moving forward. We're still building technology, building processes. I think we probably can't even imagine some of the tech that is going to exist to allow people to work asynchronously and remotely in the future. Now, hybrid is more complex than working remotely. It's easier when everybody's all in the office or when everyone is remote. We're now in this place where we maybe have hybrid, some people in the office, some people remote. We're maybe working through schedules on how we have people coordinate in the office from time to time. It is more complex, absolutely. And as leaders and organizations, we really need to be deliberate about how we build that hybrid culture. I mentioned earlier that the role of the office has changed for many organizations, that the office is no longer that place that we get that deep work done. Now, here's a question for you. I'll throw this out and ask you to throw your answer into the chat. Do you think hybrid and remote work increases turnover? Throw a yes or a no into the chat. Do you think that more people working remotely or hybrid increases turnover overall? I'm seeing lots of no's come in. I'm seeing some yeses. Okay. Okay. So this is a really interesting question, and the research I'm going to share here is from Gartner. Here's what's interesting about it. Interestingly, employee turnover does increase as more employers offer hybrid and remote options. What we find is that when people are working fully remote and maybe hybrid as well, we have weaker ties to the organization, especially if the organization isn't working really hard to build strong ties to the organization. So we may find that people have weaker ties to the organization, especially if they start working for the organization in a fully remote environment, right? For many of us, if we were working full-time in person for years and then went remote, we can probably maintain some of that connection, but starting remote somewhere else might create some weaker ties. And so there is an increase to turnover because of hybrid and remote, but employee turnover also increases even more if the option for hybrid and remote doesn't exist in an organization. So we see that more people might turn over in a remote environment, but even more will turn over if an organization doesn't have some flexibility and remote and hybrid options. So you're going to experience potentially more turnover either way. And when we look at what happened in 2021, 44% of excess turnover in 2021 was driven by hybrid or remote work. But 59% of people would change or select a job based on the ability to work from any location or to work remotely. So what we're now kind of seeing here is that folks are making turnover decisions or decisions to leave and exit differently than they used to. And that we can attribute some of the turnover to things being hybrid and remote, but we can also attribute a lot of turnover to things not being hybrid or remote. So not offering hybrid or remote is not the answer to solving the turnover issue. Doing a good job of creating stronger bonds to organizations is the answer there, right? How are we focusing on building connection, building community within our organization, even if we're not in a physical place together? That will have an impact on turnover. But offering, remote will also potentially reduce turnover because people will leave if they don't have the option. People want the flexibility, they want the choice. Even if many people are opting to work in the office, they still want the choice to know they can work from home from time to time or when they need to. What we're also seeing is that overall going forward, and it'll be different based on the industry, but overall we can expect turnover in organizations to be just a little bit higher. So if pre-pandemic, your turnover was 10% year over year, you might find post-pandemic, it's 15%. If your turnover was 20%, maybe it's now 30%. Like we're having sort of a 50% increase on what previous turnover looked like pre-pandemic. So things have changed and people are also, again, reevaluating, making decisions based on this remote hybrid option, and that's going to have an impact on turnover. Now, the main thing that we're doing here is when we think about reimagining work and hybrid and remote options, we've been talking for the past 2.5 years about focusing on outcomes and output and not activities and hours worked, that we're really focusing on what people are getting done, what people are contributing, as opposed to sitting at their desk for 8 hours a day. Right? The outcome is more important than the hours somebody puts in. And that part of what we're doing with hybrid and remote work is we're allowing for bursts of collaboration followed by deep work. And in the office or Zoom meetings are great for these bursts of collaboration, but working from home or in an office where you can close your door is great for deep work. It's great for that focus work where you need to power through something for a few hours to get it done. And so in these environments, if you are an environment that's offering hybrid and remote, we want to focus on building connection. We want to focus on building the relationship between employees and leaders. And we also want to recognize that if some are remote in a workplace, we should sort of all act as though we're remote. So for example, if you have a team meeting happening of 10 people, and half of those people are working from home and half are in the office, the sort of recommendation and best practice is to treat everybody as though they're remote. So when you have that meeting, everybody signs in from their own individual computer, as opposed to having the 5 in office in a boardroom on one screen and one camera, and then the 5 at home. It makes it very hard for the 5 at home to really jump in or contribute in real time to the 5 people who are in office, sort of seeing everything that's going on at once. And so the recommendation is that if one person's remote, we're all remote. We all sign in from our own computers. One shift I'm seeing in that now is the idea of if you do have 5 people that are in office and the other 5 at home, that maybe you do get in a boardroom, but everybody logs onto their own computer with a headset in the same room. Or everybody logs on so you can see everybody on screen on camera, but mutes, and then you use the conference line or the boardroom line for sound. But at least that way, everybody who's remote still sees each individual on their screen, sees all of the, the emotions and sort of things that are happening that you're picking up on from a body language perspective when everybody's on the individual screen, which is hard to pick up on when you're just watching a whole boardroom of 5 people on a screen. So we're seeing some changes happening in how we use that tech. So number 1 was that hybrid remote piece. Number 2 is well-being and sustained flexibility. So we know that 63% of job seekers called work-life balance their top priority when picking a new job in a recent LinkedIn study. So well-being, work-life balance is a top priority. That came up in the chat from your discussion earlier as well. And we see that job seekers, when they're picking their priorities, they actually pick work-life balance over compensation as a top priority. So more people are finding it's more important for work-life balance by a little bit than compensation. And then the other is colleagues and culture. So these are things that people are considering when making a move or when considering staying at their current workplace. And we're hearing that Gen Z wants a culture built on mental health and wellness. So 66% of Gen Z say more investment in mental health will improve company culture. How many of your organizations do you feel are currently sort of investing in wellness activities and in activities that support mental health in your workplace, or maybe have a wellness program? So I'll maybe ask people to throw in the chat if you've got some programming in your workplace. You can throw in a yes, or you can share maybe some examples of some of the things that are offered. What we are going to be seeing is a bit of a shift in what some of those typical wellness programs look like. So in the past, those wellness programs have often looked like massage therapists coming in a couple times a month, yoga classes, a discounted gym membership, maybe access to a nutritionist or things like that, maybe some challenges around fitness or well-being or walking. I know a lot of workplaces that did sort of walking challenges during the pandemic to get people outside. I see Ken has added here, yes, regular social events as a part of wellness, absolutely. So we've got sort of a standard way we look at wellness events and how that fits into our benefits program. It's going to shift a little bit in the future. Oh, and I see, okay, we've got somebody mentioning free counseling sessions through an online therapy program, and many of you might have EAP or employee assistance programs where you can leverage some free counseling as well. Excellent. What we're going to see is that wellness is also going to shift into acknowledging that people need time to rest and recover. That taking time to pause or recover can sometimes be seen as a weakness in an organization or in the business world, that people won't allow themselves to do it. But we think about athletes for a second, right? We think about world-class athletes who are the best at what they do. Do they take time to rest? Do they have rest days? Absolutely, right? You think about somebody who's running a marathon and training to run a marathon. Okay, so they're training up to get to these, certain points where they know they can run the full marathon, but they get closer and they start taking really deliberate, specific rest days. Right? And they sort of decline a little bit right before the event so that they can really nail it on event day. Rest and recovery is important, and that is a part of wellness and well-being. In the past, we measured employee satisfaction. We did that one for a long time, right? Like, how satisfied are you with benefits? How satisfied are you with our corporate sustainability program? How satisfied are you with this, that, the other thing? That sort of shifted into engagement, right? Employee engagement, measuring, do people feel they're getting the recognition that they need? Do people connect with the purpose and values of the organization? Do people have what they need to do their day-to-day work? All of these engagement metrics, and those have veered into like, am I proud to work for this company? Would I recommend this company to other people? Do I see myself still working here 2 years from now? Those are engagement questions that we can be asking. In the future, engagement surveys will shift to include more on well-being and different ways of measuring well-being as a metric. And organizations will be considered and maybe publish their well-being metrics at certain points along the way as well. How are they going to measure that? There's some interesting research into that. One of the things that I recently heard, I think this, I don't know that I would want this in my organization because it feels just a little big brother, but an example of something that they were going to look at that was more behavioral analysis was if they can figure out what music people are listening to through their computers at work, what does it mean when that music changes? Are they listening to really upbeat music at certain points and then they move into more mellow music? What does that say about their well-being? And so actually really looking at people's behaviors at work and how does that indicate where well-being is at, whether well-being is high or whether people are struggling. So that's an interesting example that freaks me out a little bit, but it's an illustration of what, when we think about the future of work, of what tech might exist to think about how we can measure well-being. Employee wellness will become this new metric. It doesn't just mean health benefits. We often think about it in terms of health or social event sort of benefits. It's also going to mean financial health. It's going to mean community health. And how are we giving people time and tools to reduce burnout? Burnout is a word we're hearing a lot these days. I attended a conference on Tuesday this week. I was at the CPHR conference, which is the big HR conference in Manitoba every year. And there was a lot of discussion around burnout. And I think that in one of the sessions, they talked about some of the stats being close to 50% in terms of people that would identify that they're on that brink of burnout, that, one more unrealistic project or time of stress could sort of throw them over the edge into full-on burnout. There's going to be sort of a greater concern about the whole person that comes to work, not just the worker, but how's this person doing holistically, right? How are they doing in life and not just work, and sort of this work-life integration. One of the presentations that I went to earlier this week talked about the human energy crisis. So they were referring to this burnout phenomenon as the human energy crisis, and that we're in particular seeing it in healthcare and in education, but we are seeing it in other industries as well. When we think about well-being, it's also not just about teaching wellness initiatives and how to better handle stress or how to, manage your time and be more productive. I'd previously been with an organization a while ago that was doing a lot of work on like, okay, here's a webinar with a doctor talking about how to reduce your stress and how to manage your burnout and how to reframe your mindset and all of these things. And it was a very stressful workplace. And I remember thinking, I'm okay, but I'm looking at some other people here and thinking, they don't need to be told, they just need to be managing their time better. Like they need change in their workload in order to reduce burnout. They need change in the way work is getting done and how stressful work is. They can't manage their mindset into getting out of burnout at this stage. They're too far in, right? And so it's going to be more than just presentations. Even again, in this conference earlier this week, this was from UKG, which is a sort of North American HRIS and payroll provider. They had a ton of research they were sharing. And, they were sharing this idea of like offering free yoga classes is nice and great. But for the person who's super overwhelmed and super burned out, they're like, I don't have time for that. I don't even have the energy for that. It might in some cases mean giving people time, right? Of saying like, hey, take next week off. You need a break. There's a reason that last year LinkedIn gave all of their employees a week off. They shut down the company essentially for a week, aside from people who absolutely had to be there to keep the platform operating. And then those folks got another week. But they did that so that people could take a week and not get any emails from anybody else that week about things that were going to be waiting for them when they got back. They took a week and it was a pause. People didn't work that week. They just didn't move things forward that week. Now, not every organization can do that, but it was a recognition that people were at their limit and something had to give. This is going to be a non-negotiable if you want to attract top talent. Thinking about well-being, right? And what you can do in your organization to support that community, that financial and that personal wellness. Reimagine how we structure work in a way that supports people's professional and their personal success. And we want to let people set boundaries around what they need to do good work as well, right? If somebody says, I really need to take an hour lunch break and get off my computer and get outside, that makes me significantly more productive for the rest of the day. That we're allowing people to set some of those boundaries where they say, don't book me between noon and 1 unless it's an emergency, right? And where possible, part of well-being might also let people mean letting people work from anywhere, or maybe even if you're mostly in office, of saying here's a bank of days a year that you can work from home or work from anywhere. Maybe mostly we expect you to be in office, or maybe we have a hybrid arrangement where it's 3 days in office, 2 days at home. But in addition to that, here's a bank of days you get each year that are additional days that you can work from home, and you can use those flexibly. Just use them in a way that works for the team and the organization, and deadlines, sort of like you would vacation, right? That you're conscious about some of the things that are going on in the workplace. The 8-hour day is a little bit outdated. Right before this session, I was, scrolling LinkedIn a little bit, and I saw a fellow HR consultant and leadership consultant talking about this idea of the 8-hour day potentially being outdated. So I'm going to throw a poll up here. Gemma, if you wouldn't mind throwing that poll when you have a minute. I'm curious what you think in terms of how many hours most people actually work in a day. So this is an American stat, but how many hours in a work day do you think people are actually productively working? So we got 3 hours, 4 hours, 5.5 hours. Okay, lots of answers coming in here. We'll give you another minute here. So far, kind of close answers, not way off. Okay, we're about 40 out of 56 people. Any stragglers that want to throw their guess in there before we close the poll? No? Okay, let's end it there. So we've got about 22% of folks saying they think around 3 hours, 39% of folks saying about 4 hours, and 39% also saying about 5.5 hours. I feel like this next slide that I'm going to share is going to freak you out a little bit. So this next slide, the average American worker is working about 2 hours and 53 minutes a day, not even 3 hours. I'm sure most of us are looking at that going I don't know how that's possible. It's an interesting statistic, and it does seem low to me as well. But that's what the research bears out of the States, with over sort of 2,000 participants over a period of time. That when you look at the actual amount of time people are doing focused work, that they're getting stuff done, it's about 2 hours and 53 minutes. So, we might be looking at meetings that we're in that are an hour long. Well, how many minutes of that hour long meeting is actually productive or about getting work done? Are the first 10 minutes about catching up, which is still valuable, right? But if we really parse out what is productive, effective time of getting things done, we're coming in a little lower than 3 hours. So it is time to re-examine work. We've been working with the 8-hour workday for over 100 years. Back in the late 1800s, Illinois started implementing legislation around changing the workday. That was sort of the first shift. And then the real shift came, I think, around 1914, when Ford Motor Company shifted from reducing from a 12-hour day to an 8-hour day while doubling pay. So people went down from 12 hours to 8 hours and got double the pay. and productivity went way up. They realized that when people worked a little bit less, they actually were more productive. And, we see now too, that even looking at somebody who's working a 50-hour work week, well, when we hit 50 hours in a work week, productivity drops way off for anything after 50 hours. After 55 hours, it's virtually like no impact at all on productivity. So if somebody says they're working 70, 80 hours a week, they're still only getting 55 hours a week worth of stuff done because their productivity just falls off a cliff at that point. So we need to assess what makes sense. Some of you might be working in environments that are billable hours. Well, that's a whole other assessment that you're looking at here and what that means for your business. But we might consider what makes the most sense. I think I'm more productive with more flexibility and more autonomy over my time. And, I'll make adjustments where if I have a crazy week, say I have a crazy Thursday, today's Thursday. So let's say today's a crazy day. It's not a crazy day. It's a delightful day to be here with all of you. But if it was a crazy day and I had meetings all day and I was getting stuff done and just plowing through work, and let's say at like 2:30 in the afternoon, I just hit a wall. I'm done. I'm just like, my brain is mush. It's done. I could sit here on my computer and pretend to be working. So I look like I'm online for another hour and a half or 2 hours. Or I could just leave and go for a walk and end my day here and say, I've done what I needed to get done today. And bottom line is I know I've hit a wall. Like anything I do now is not going to be great. And then maybe instead, I'm going to do an hour of work on Saturday morning. Right? I'm going to make that adjustment, having that autonomy to adjust things. Now, I'm kind of lucky because, Uplift Engagement is my organization. So the only person I need permission from is me. I have that flexibility now. But are we having situations where we have people who for that last hour of the day, 2 hours of the day are just sitting on their phone or, doing busy work to look like they're doing something, but they're actually kind of done for the day? Are we giving people permission to say, okay, I've hit my limit today, I'm out? Are we focusing more on outcomes and hitting goals and working towards things than we are on the exact hours in a day somebody works? This also might mean, allowing people to work different hours. And we see this a lot. We've already seen this idea of sort of core hours, right? That we say, hey, we want people to be in the office or be available between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern time. If we've got people working on multiple time zones, but you can start your day earlier or later, but we have these core hours that we want people to be available for meetings and status updates and that kind of thing. So we've already seen that shift happen. And I think we're going to see it happen even more. We're seeing organizations think about the rise of the 4-day work week. That came up in the chat earlier. A couple people threw that one in. Or maybe summer hours, right? Working a 4-day work week over the course of, July, August. Or throwing in sort of wellness days into summer months or into like sort of holiday or celebration periods. Part of the future of work will see organizations trading money for more time. Sort of two ways this can play out. One is you can have people working 5 days a week and decide to go to a 4-day work week, keeping everybody's salaries the exact same. That would be the Brandish example that I have here. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Brandish agency, but they're a marketing agency here in the city in Winnipeg. And they moved to a 4-day work week about a year ago. They've got a ton of content on their LinkedIn and their founder, Lee Waltham, posts about it a lot, about the success that they've seen for their team. They saw no change in terms of the amount of work that folks were able to get done. No change in terms of impact to clients. Or in terms of like availability or concerns from clients. They set that expectation at the beginning that, hey, we're not available on Fridays unless something's an emergency. And so they were able to increase well-being, had people who feel really good about being at work, who really appreciate this shift, and they're still meeting all of their business objectives. And so that's the decision they've made. Some workplaces might be even more flexible where they say, hey, you can work a 4-day week or you can work 6 hours a day. Like, what do you prefer? And different people do different things. Some organizations may not be able to make the business case for that, but you might still have folks that say, hey, I'd like to work a 4-day work week. I'm willing to trade that, money for time. I'm willing to give up something so that I can have more time. I think this is going to be an important thing for organizations to consider. a while ago was working with an organization that had a superstar programmer on their team, a senior programmer who'd been with the organization for 8 years, which was great because it was an organization that, you know, most people at that point had been on board for less than 2 or 3 years, and this person had been there for 8 years. And she's a superstar employee, does great work, great mentor, great like attitude for the team. And she went to her leader and she said, hey, I'm struggling with sort of balancing work and life, meeting some of the demands of my personal life right now. I'd really like to work a 4-day week. Totally willing to take the paid cut. Like I'm willing to work a 0.8 and get paid for a 0.8. I think I can still, you know, work and meet the equivalent probably of like a 0.9, even at a 0.8. And that'll just help me meet my personal and work life sort of balance needs. And her leader thought about it. He was like, yeah, no, everybody else is full time. This is gonna be really hard to accommodate. I just can't make it work. And he said no. And then I don't know why, but he was shocked a month later when she gave her notice and went somewhere else. Not only shocked, he was devastated. Like he didn't even see it coming. I'm like, of course she left and went somewhere else. She's a senior programmer. They're paying those folks double to work in remote jobs, you know, all over North America right now, where she can probably work 4 days a week. Of course she left, right? These are things we're going to need to think about. And what I encourage organizations and leaders and individuals to think is not, no, we haven't done that, or no, that's not going to work, but to at least ask themselves in these scenarios, what would that look like? What would that look like? What could that look like? What are the ways that we could make that work, as opposed to just initially going to, these are all the reasons it won't work, right? What are the ways in which it could work? What are some of the options there? And I think in retrospect, if I asked that leader now, he would say, like, I should have taken the 4 days a week. That was silly, right? I lost somebody who's stellar because I didn't really entertain that request or conversation. Okay, so that's a little bit on the flexibility side of things. One other thing I'll just add here is that people value individual flexibility more than they do broad definitions of flexibility. And so giving people 4 Fridays off in the summer that are dedicated, required, you take these 4 days and those are the only ones you take. If you can't take those, then you work and you just don't get those days, versus, hey, we're giving you 4 days over the summer that you can take off. Take them when you want. People generally appreciate having some individual ability to adjust whatever flexibility they're being offered to who they are and what they need. So I might give the example of somebody, I actually at a previous workplace had somebody who in the afternoons would go pick up her kids. She worked mostly from home, maybe in the office 1 or 2 days a week, but she would pick up her kids from school at like 3:15 every day. So we all knew based on her calendar that she took off around 3, went, picked up her kids, got them home, got them a snack, and then was back online and finished her day. And that was just part of the arrangement of how she gets work done. Great, that's what works for her. Now, I don't have kids, but that doesn't mean that maybe I don't want every day to have the opportunity to say, hey, I'm piecing out for an hour to go to the gym. I 100% don't want to go to the gym, to be clear. Bad example. But in theory, that could be an example. Or maybe I want to go take a walk and lengthen my day and walk for an hour and then come back and work a little bit longer to finish out the day. What is that individual piece, right? If we're offering something to somebody who's a parent, what's the alternative of that for somebody who's not a parent? If we're offering something that other people benefit from because of their sort of life arrangements or, sort of where they are in life, let's make sure we're giving an alternative to other folks that are in a different place, and that individuals can determine different ways that flexibility will work for them. Number 3 here on my list is job design and individual work arrangements. When we look at top turnover facts, these are some of the reasons that people leave and top reasons that they turn over. A lot of them relate to career advancement or skill development. And then a lot of them relate to not being satisfied with my role, or maybe feeling that my skills and strengths aren't leveraged in my role. And so if we keep those things in mind, we can start thinking about, okay, what's the job design for this person based on who they are and what they need? And what we're going to see in the future of work is building job roles around people instead of slotting people into existing roles. And instead of saying, like, here's a box and all we're looking for is this box, and we're going to fit people into this box, and we're not willing to adjust the box, then we're going to say, actually, we've got this great person here. What could we build for them that meets both needs that we have as an organization and where we're going, but also meets their needs? I think this is particularly important when we think about retention. Sometimes that can be harder to do with a new person coming in, because despite having gone through interviews and figuring out this person, it's hard to maybe know what somebody's exact strengths are until we start working with them and can really dig in. But if you've got people on your team that are awesome, right, that are great performers, that have a good attitude, contribute well to the organization from a culture perspective, and you want to hold on to those people, and you get the sense that they're struggling with some of these turnover issues, then start thinking about crafting a role for them. Hey, based on who you are and what you uniquely bring, what would be your ideal job here? And is that something that we need, right? And start really, again, reimagining how we build roles around people. I've probably given this example before in a previous presentation that I've done with this group, but I had a leader a number of years ago who ran an accounting group. She had about 8 or 10 people on her team, and she was struggling with engagement on her team. She had folks that were showing up late, that were leaving early. They just quality of work wasn't always great. And one of the biggest things she noticed is they were getting in each other's business. She just had people that were worrying about what other people were doing. Oh, did you check that box? Did you do that thing? They were just getting in each other's business every day. And she decided to sort of blow up how her team was getting things done. And she got rid of all the job descriptions, and she just went through and did an inventory of, okay, this is what we need to get done as a team. This is an inventory of what everybody likes doing and what they're really great at doing. And she dug in, she got all that information, and then she assigned work from there. So it was no longer, this is a job and this is all that job does. She said, okay, who's good at what? Still had to consider some workflow issues and what made sense for certain people to do. And I'm sure people still had some things on their plate that they didn't love doing. We don't always love 100% of our job, but she did find with making that shift that a lot of the engagement issues she was experiencing went away. People showed up on time, less sick days, and people didn't get in each other's business. When they liked what they were working on and liked what they were focusing on, they didn't worry about what everybody else was doing. So she had some really interesting sort of natural impacts that came from making that shift. So we might consider building roles based on strengths and interests. We might let others or individuals explore other roles and internal opportunities to find those strengths and interests. Look at developing skills within the current role and outside of the current role, especially for those superstar folks on your team, and arrange for mentorship and coaching opportunities and other ways that people can sort of upskill. If you're a leader within your organization, you might be a stellar leader, but you still may not always be the best coach or the best mentor for every single person on your team. You're still leading them, but maybe there's somebody else in the organization where you say, hey, Andrew, I'm going to hook you up with this other person in this other department who I think would be a great coach for you. And here's the connection that I see there and why this might work. That you're arranging mentorship and coaching, maybe just outside of yourself too, giving people some opportunity there. When we think about job design and this idea of individualizing work, we're also going to see personalized learning and development opportunities for people, recognizing that the career ladder is kind of broken, or if it's not broken, it's breaking. This idea of well, you do this job and then you do this job and then you do this job, that doesn't really exist in the workplace the way that it used to. In some organizations, it might still be a little bit more hierarchical. Oh boy, I haven't eaten lunch yet. I can't get there right now. But it's more of a jungle gym than it is a ladder. At this point, it's okay, I was here, but now I'm interested in this, and I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go over here, and lateral moves and different moves that we can make along the way. So are we helping employees do that, and are we personalizing what makes sense for them and where they're going? We want to increase the possibility that people will see opportunity in their own organization, that they will see possibility. And sometimes when we just look at that ladder, we don't see a lot of possibility, because we're well, that person's not retiring for 6 years and I'm not waiting it out in this position for the next 6 years. Okay, well, what are the other options here? The pandemic did prompt a change of mindset with employees now looking for sort of personalized learning programs. There's something out there that's sort of called the Netflix approach. And Netflix does focus on individualized learning plans and almost like a cafeteria style learning plan or program where people can pull from different options and really build their own learning path. Another piece of this would be understanding personal work preferences. So I mentioned earlier about playing to strengths. So, when we think about individual work arrangements, well, what are this person's strengths? What does that say about the work I want them focusing on? When are their productivity peaks? When do they do their best work? How do I understand that about my team as a whole and what that says about when we do certain types of work as a team? The example I would give is that I'm way more productive in the morning than I am in the evening. Maybe just to make sure you're all still here with me, shoot into the chat. When are you most productive? Are you most productive first thing in the morning, midday, evening, like later at night? If you know when you're most productive, when you do your best sort of thinking or deep work, what time of day is that for you? I know for me, it's definitely the morning. I think that what I can get done between about 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. is double what I can get done between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. most days. If I have a great 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., I'm checking a lot of things off my list. I'm getting a lot of things done. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people throw morning in there. It's really worth understanding that about yourself and your team. So one of the things that I do, and it doesn't work 100% of the time, but I basically try not to book meetings in the morning. If I'm talking with clients, I'm trying to book afternoon meetings or 11 a.m. or later meetings, because I want that first chunk of the day to just power through and get things done. And I structure my workday that way. So do you know that about yourself? Do you know that about your team? Understanding individual motivators. What are the people on your team motivated by? Are they motivated by certain types of work that they love working on, certain problems that they love to solve? Different people are motivated by, technical competence. Some people want to be the best at what they do and be technically super competent, while other people want to be sort of known for the relationships they build and being liked. And relationship competence. What's important to the people on your team, and what does that tell you about how you might arrange work for them or what opportunities you might give them? And then we want to understand needs and flexibility and boundaries as well. So what are those flexibility pieces that different people need? And what are those boundaries people set? Like somebody saying, don't book me from 12 to 1 every day. I need to take my lunch. I had somebody on a team a while ago who said, if you're booking me in meetings and you see I've been in meetings, till 2 o'clock, don't book my next meeting with you right at 2 o'clock, book it at 2:15. I need 15 minutes. Like I need to be able to reset, recalibrate, look at my notes, prepare for whatever's next. I don't want to be back to back. Give me 10 or 15 minutes between each meeting. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. And I think some people might find that they're much more effective in a meeting if they have that 5, 10, 15 minutes in between. There is a worksheet that is included with wherever you're watching this video. So you're watching this on the sort of the Ingenium hub. There should be a PDF file there as well that you can download. It has some questions on these things. And so if you want to think for yourself, what are my strengths? What are my productivity peaks? There, they've put a good comment in the chat telling you where to find that. So if you want to think about what are your strengths, what are your productivity peaks, what are your motivators, and maybe what are some of your boundaries? And really what you're thinking about here is, what do I need to be able to do my best work? What does that look like for me? And what do I need to be able to do that? And test that out, see what works, see what doesn't, and then maybe be able to communicate that to my leader or to key people on my team. So I'll leave that with you as something to think about. I mentioned earlier about this employee journey that we're talking about, this employee experience. What the future of work is going to include is melding employee experience from organization design, employee expectations, needs and wants, and then the individual. So it's going to blend this idea of what the organization needs and what the employee needs. And that's what's going to build employee experience moving forward. Number 4 on my list of 5 things when we reimagine work, number 4 is leadership and culture. We know that purpose and workplace culture matter more than ever. Leaders are more important than ever when it comes to leading remotely, showing discretion about what you can and can't make work around flexible work. And leaders will be really key in making those individualized work arrangements. If we're playing to strengths, if we're playing to productivity peaks, leaders are going to be key in making that work. We know that 84% of how people feel about their workplace is directly related to the relationship they have with their leader. So that remains the most important factor in people's engagement at work, is the relationship they have with their leader. And when we think about culture, people are really considering the word culture and investments in culture when they look at job postings. So when they're thinking about joining an organization, they want to see that the organization is talking about their workplace culture. Also, just want to recognize here that when we think about workplace culture, we might be thinking about like foosball tables and pizza parties, but it is more than foosball tables and pizza parties. And we've got this awesome little diagram here, right? Like hardworking employee drowning, manager coming in like they're going to help, and then they're like, high five, pizza party, and then the person drowns. It's kind of that same idea of like offering the free yoga classes when the person is like, great, thanks, but I don't have time to attend. Can we actually just talk about the fact that I've been working 60 hours a week and my workload is unmanageable and unreasonable, and I'm about to quit or burn out or go on stress leave if we don't deal with that? Like, the yoga classes aren't going to solve this other problem. So are we dealing with the real issues when it comes to workplace culture, when it comes to how we're leading? When we think about workplace culture and leadership, we also see that red tape, rules, bureaucracy is having an impact on talent. And talent are interested in going to, working with, and staying with organizations that can be a bit more agile. And so that might mean, when it comes to this idea of flexibility, that we don't have a policy on absolutely every possible way that this could go, that we simply have guidelines. And we say, these are the guidelines, these are the broad fence posts that you have to stay within. But other than that, have fun, figure it out as a team. We trust you to figure some of this out. And we're not going to put a whole bunch of red tape on it that sort of takes all of the joy out of figuring out how to make work best for everyone. The future of leadership will involve more automation in the leader role, in the manager role. We see a lot of tech out there now that has pulse surveys, all these different ways of like measuring and connecting and communicating with people, tech around how we hold one-on-ones. Those things will continue. And one of the trends that we will see is that managers, leaders will become less task-oriented, and they will focus more on relationships in the future. We see leaders going from being task managers to relationship managers, because a lot of the task management side of things we're going to be able to automate. And it's going to be more about how do we build strong relations to keep people connected to this workplace, and to make sure that we're addressing concerns around well-being and psychological safety. Number 5, last one I want to mention, and I'll just mention this one briefly, is about asynchronous work. So this is something that we are in particular seeing with global organizations where people are working in all different time zones. But asynchronous work really means, work, collaboration, communication, where the employee owns their own time. They don't have an expectation of immediately responding to people. Maybe it's more of a 24-hour cycle response, as opposed to feeling like I need to respond by end of day, my day. We're going 24 hours to accommodate for all of the time zones. We're doing more shared documents, shared file management, where people can see in real time what people are working on and where they're at whenever they're working. And it doesn't rely on the other person also working at the same time. And rather than requesting or expecting employees to be online, available, responsive during set hours, companies that work asynchronously will allow their employees to complete work at times that are convenient to them. And so they'll respond within something like a 24-hour time frame. The advantages of this is that you can get talent from all over the world if you're working this way. It provides more flexibility, and it allows for different types of personalities to thrive in the workplace. It also encourages that time that people need for long, deep, concentrated periods of working. So what does all of this mean for organizations, for HR, for leaders? I just see a question that came in about sharing the PowerPoint, and it was a direct message to me, but I will make sure that I share a PDF of the PowerPoint with Gemma following this presentation, and I'm perfectly happy to have that sent out or attached in your Ingenium hub where people can download that. So for HR folks need to think about these guidelines of what can or can't be accommodated at the extremes, but leave some room in the middle for people to show discretion. and to figure out really what works for their team based on who their team is and what they need and what they deliver. Communicate examples of how guidelines work. We want to train leaders on being able to implement individualized arrangements of maybe around what fairness and equity looks like in these individual arrangements. We also want to have some awareness around how this can impact DEI efforts, especially when we think about hybrid, remote. What we know based on research, and this is pre-pandemic too, is that typically we reward and promote people for being visible in organizations more than we even do their actual performance. People who are good at making themselves visible tend to be promoted and rewarded more. So that means extroverts, right? That means people who are good at sharing their accomplishments and talking about what they're working on. They tend to see more growth in that way. When you add in the remote element, okay, well now it's amplified. We see that women are more likely to want to work from home than men. We also see that folks that would identify as BIPOC are slightly more likely to want to work from home. That's what some of the research would show. And so we already have people who are maybe underrepresented who now also want to work from home, or are a bit more likely to want to work from home, and they're going to be less visible, right? Leaders believe that people perform better on site, even though the research doesn't show that. Research shows that people are as effective at their work, whether at home or in the office overall. There might be some people that struggle here and there, but overall, people are just as effective at home as they are at work. But leaders and organizations reward visibility. So we need to have some awareness around these biases to ensure that we're not set back in our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, that we're actively aware of that and working on ways of helping folks be more visible in their organization, and making sure that visibility is not the key factor in promotions and rewards. Leaders will need to show discretion, so we need to hire strong leaders that communicate well, that build relationships. We're going to make sure we train these leaders. We're also going to make sure that leaders really focus on building high levels of trust, because if we're experimenting with work and how we do things and we're tweaking and trying things, there needs to be a high level of trust. For organizations, I think they need to seize the opportunity and really adapt to change. So they need to invest in leaders, they need to invest in culture, in employee experience, and invest in tech and tools that will help enable performance. And they need to conduct experiments. I think that video that we watched earlier sort of summarizes it really well. We made it all up. I love the beginning of that video when, you know, the dead guy looks at Alan and he's like, Alan, we made up your job. Like, we made it all up, right? We made it all up to start with, so we can reinvent it. When it comes to things like employee engagement, employee experience, how we get things done, where we get things done, when we get things done, we can experiment. And so I really encourage you in your organizations to be looking at and thinking about what if. What would it look like if? What could it look like if? What could we try? What are we comfortable with? You can trial things. Right? You can say, hey, we're trialing a 4-day work week for one summer just to see how it goes. And then we're going back to our 5-day work week. See what you find out, see what works, see what doesn't. Start with a 4.5-day work week where you say, hey, we're trialing everybody take Friday afternoons off, or some other arrangement. Maybe that's not the thing that's needed in your organization, but there probably is some other shift or change that you do need to consider. So trial it, give it a go, see what works, see what doesn't. And for all of you as individuals, I think it's important that you know how, where, when you do your best work, that you advocate for yourself and you advocate for others, and that you embrace and allow others to work differently than you do too. That you accept that you know what works for you and something else might work for somebody else. So these are the things going forward that are going to be really important. When we think about reimagining work, and I'm sure there's a ton of other things that we'll be adding to this list over the next couple of years that I can't even think of right now. But I want everybody to remember that, you know, with big changes, we have big opportunities. So please think about what if. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Andrew here. I know that there might be a few questions. I've also just got my LinkedIn and my website here. So if anybody does want to connect with me or ask any questions that we don't have time for today, please feel free. And Andrew, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jane. That was excellent. Really good topic. I myself probably have many questions that I could ask you, and I'll refrain from getting into a philosophical debate over how we're pumping up Industry 4.0 while still living in an Industry 1.0 work constraint, as you alluded to with your 8-hour workday discussion. I'll leave it to the audience to get their questions into the chat for you. As I said, just type them in there. We do have a first one coming in from Joy. I assume you can see the chat window. I'm going to read it anyway, just for recording's sake. So can you share your opinion about entering timesheets, your hours worked? If you're still able to get more work done, or especially complete the work before the end of usual closing hours, and especially considering your stated statistic of the 2 hours and 53 minutes of actual work during a day. What do you consider the ideal hours that an employer should create for a workday for their employees?
So Joy, that's a great question. And honestly, it's probably not one I can answer. I think every workplace, every employee, every situation is different. And so I think you'd need to consider the role in terms of what those ideal hours are. You'd need to sort of dig in and do your own research into like what's working with your team, what it takes for time. But I think what it also means is that we're paying people for output, not for time. And so you don't actually maybe have to worry about the time unless people are working too much. That, hey, if I'm paying somebody for this and I'm willing to say, hey, on average, that should be about 7 hours a day, but they're doing it in 4, well, cool. They're still getting paid the same. They just managed to do it in less time. When you think about the timesheet side of things, I think timesheets matter if somebody's an hourly employee and they have to like fill things out in order to get paid. But I'm assuming most people who are on this webinar are salaried employees. And I did see at the beginning of the pandemic, some people filling out timesheets and having to report back on what they were working on. What we generally saw and what the research would show on that is that people just got really good at fudging how much time they were actually spending on things, right? That they're like, oh yeah, I did that research for an hour and a half. They're like, it was actually 30 minutes, right? That people spent almost more time worrying and fudging those numbers that could have been spent on getting work done. So they weren't an accurate reflection over the course of the pandemic. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
I suppose I'll actually provide information to you, Jane.
Sure.
For us in the engineering world, we often have to record our hours for other purposes. There are certain things that we need to assign hours or record the hours to in terms of development. Many companies will claim tax credits for development work, so we have to record our hours, how long we worked on a certain project to claim that as a taxable item. But yes, I agree. You will
probably a bigger question too, right? Of like industry wise, like, are we going to have a system where we can be really specific about, yes, these are the things that need to be recorded and shared, but are we also then allowing people to acknowledge that, but okay, for an hour a day, I had thinking, reflection, catch up time that's not going to fall in one of those categories, and that's okay. And that not every minute or hour has to be accounted for in that way.
True. We do have another question here from Rod. Do you think that the pre-pandemic move to a very open workspace has made the work from home more appreciated?
Great question, Rod. Yes, absolutely. And so interesting with the open office environment movement. Even pre-pandemic, there was a lot out there showing that it wasn't very effective, that it was a good use of space and it allowed for some collaboration and connection, but that the majority of people need to like close a door or to, you know, put their headphones in or whatever to be able to focus on work. And so, yes, I think that's actually absolutely a component in people being happy about working from home. It was like, oh, finally, I have my privacy again. And I've seen a lot of discussion out there about when it comes back to going back to the office, about the importance of having lots of spaces where people can close doors, get their own space if you want people to be able to focus at work.
Yes, I found, the cubicle walls were actually nice to have. Although I did like it when we shortened the cubicle walls and you could stand up and see who was around.
Yeah.
So that helped. We have just another minute left. So if anyone has a final question to get in there at the nick of time. I'll have one. Is quiet quitting just Wally from Dilbert?
Yeah. I think that's a good analogy.
Oh yeah. It's good. That's
It's,
what I found.
It's become such a phenomenon, but I think like quiet quitting is nothing new. We just gave a new name to it.
Okay. Well, without anything popping up, I'll give you one more from me.
Sure.
I've heard that a company has about 6 months after a new hire starts to get them engaged and keep them engaged, or else after that 6 months, they sort of resign themselves. Is that still a valid number?
I'd actually say it's probably less.
Oh, really? Oh, shoot.
Yeah, I think that most people are making a decision, and I've seen a lot of good research out there about most people making that decision within the first 30 to 90 days. The same way that employers are often within 30, 90 days having sort of a gut feeling on whether they think somebody is the right fit or not. I think employees are doing the same. The research would show that the most likely time somebody will leave an organization is at 1 year. The second most likely time they'll leave is at 2 years, third most likely 3 years, and it just keeps going down. The longer somebody is there, the longer they'll be there. Is sort of what the trend is. But people are making that decision in the first 30 to 90 days. They might still stay 6 months or a year, but they decided early on, I'm only making it 6 months or a year.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, I think that concludes our session here. I want to thank you, Jane. That was a very good presentation. Thank you for all of you viewers to joining us at Ingenium and this keynote session today. If you missed a part of it or missed any session from this week, you can always check out the Ingenium Hub on our website there for the on-demand library. The recordings are there. They'll be there until January of 2023. Starting right now, and actually 6 minutes ago, there is a virtual networking hour occurring in Gather. So there is a link in that Ingenium Hub where you can go and virtually join staff and fellow Ingenium attendees there. So Jane, do you have any final comment to
just wanted to say
with?
I'm really looking forward to eating my cookie and my lunch from Stantec now. So thank you, Stantec, for that lunch. I'm looking forward to going and devouring that now.
It's good. Yeah, I got to get to my sandwich as well. I ate the cookie already. All right. We will close it up. Thank you all for attending, and we will see you at the next session.
Thank you for watching. Visit the Ingenium On Demand library for more exclusive content.